If you've heard people talking about units or flat betting or Kelly Criterion, and you're a little confused about what you should do about that or how you should adjust your bet sizing accordingly, this is the video for you. Stay tuned. Welcome to Data Driven Sports Betting. I'm A-Train Bets and I use my brain to make bets. Now, this video, we want to talk about how to size your bets appropriately. There's a lot of misinformation out there in the sports betting Twitterverse and whatnot around how you should size your bets. And first off, you'll hear touts and other people who don't want you to know what their results actually are. They'll talk about units. Ignore that entirely. Units are not helpful in sports betting because your actual dollar amounts are meaningful. So abstracting that and using units because this is a 3-unit play or a 4-unit play or a 1-unit play or whatever, all that does is remove a critical part of the betting process, which is actually getting the money down from the equation, which is not a fair way to assess a sports bet. Because just because you say, oh, I like this play, I want to bet it for 5 units, doesn't mean whatever your 5-unit magic number is, doesn't mean you're actually going to be able to make that play. The last I checked, no sports book actually accepts units as a monetary payment. So we shouldn't be talking about those because, quite frankly, when you're a sharp sports bettor, one of the hardest things to do is get the money down to make the bet itself, right? You could look at arbitrage plays and never have to play either side. Be like, I've made $1 million on paper. Well, yeah, because the hard part is actually making the bets and winning the bets and have the bets honored by the books because they really don't like to do that sometimes, right? So ignore units, first off. Just we will not acknowledge that because that is all just made up. If you like to bet in made up land, go play units. Fine. Secondly, you will see some people who are just like, I flat bet everything. You bet on that same amount on every single play. Well, there's a big problem with that, and we're going to talk about what that is, right? So the fact is that if you are betting, say $100, just keep it simple. That probably is more than a lot of you are betting. But the fact is that if you bet $100 on every play, what you're going to have is that if you are betting at our typical minus 110 odds for $100, that's about kind of your normal barometer, right? That's what you size in your mind as $100. It's like it's roughly a coin flip, a little bit less because of the VIG and the hold from the books. But otherwise, that's the amount you're betting, right? Fine. But what happens when it's at minus 150 or minus 200? Well, now if it's minus 200 that you're betting into, a heavy favorite, what that means is that for $100 that you're betting, you're only going to win 50 if you win, and you're very likely to win. Whereas if you were sizing your bet based on how much you would win, you would be betting $200 to win $100. And that, again, is a course adjustment that you could make where now you would be risking more with a greater degree of chance of winning. But overall, if you win the relative expected percentage of the time for those favorites, you're going to win around the same amount as if you said you were playing plus 200 odds with your $100 bet. Now you risk 100 to win $200. Well, if you lose, that's not that big of a deal. You lost your 100. If you win extra. And so what ends up happening there, if you win the relative amount of the time that you're expected to, you're actually going to have an overweighting to those underdogs. Because if you're betting $100 on everything, right? If you win a smaller amount of the time, if the underdogs come through, that's going to skyrocket your results, right? So what you're going to end up doing is on average, you're going to have these swingier results because if you are calibrating on what you're winning, the more you bet heavy favorites and heavy underdogs, the more suspect you're going to be to variance when the unexpected event occurs. A scenario where you're betting a lot of favorites, if you are underbetting the favorites, which is effectively what you're doing if you're flat betting, you underbet the favorites and you overbet the underdogs. If the favorite loses, you're going to feel the pain less, but you're going to have less of your portfolio represented by favorites. On the underdog, when you win the unexpected event, you're going to feel it better and you're going to be like, I'm the greatest bettor in the world. But that's because you're overweight to the underdogs. So if you lose your favorites and you win your underdogs, you're going to have great results. But if you win your favorites and lose your underdogs, you're not going to have great results. You're probably just going to be breaking even at best. So your EV starts to get skewed because you don't have a balanced portfolio. It's kind of thinking of it like this way. It's like if you have a portfolio strategy. And what you want is a mixed portfolio of fixed income and equities. And you want to have a balanced portfolio 50-50, but the math is like the underdogs and favorites here. What you would effectively do is overweight your equities, your more risky investments, and underweight your conservative investments. And that would lead you to an undesired outcome. Now, if you want to be betting more on your underdogs, by all means, flat bet if you want to, but it's not really a good bankroll management strategy, especially if you don't understand the implications of flat betting. The next kind of betting that you will see a lot of folks advocate for is what's called the Kelly Criterion. Now, the Kelly Criterion factors in a couple things. We have videos on the Kelly Criterion, and it is a useful way to do one specific thing, and that is make sure your bet sizes don't make you broke. Because Kelly Criterion is a risk of ruin calculator that makes sure that you're not overbetting for the amount of risk and the percentage of likelihood of that event occurring. So you look at your EV percentage, so what you're calculating is your edge, and your likelihood of winning, and that is effectively what Kelly Criterion uses to make the recommended bet size. Very useful, right? That's what a lot of sports bettors use exclusively to size their bets. That is better, in my opinion, than using flat betting, certainly better than using units. So at least respects your bankroll setting and helps you size your bets according to the likelihood of winning and whether or not it's an underdog or favorite and how much edge you have. So you want to be playing more reasonably when you have a greater edge. So what we do in A-Train Station is we help you set that in. And so this Kelly multiplier and bankroll, that is what our Kelly Criterion calculator and our bet size recommendations that come in A-Train Station are based upon, and what Kelly actually calculates for you. That's great. That's a good place to start. Here's the problem though. Kelly Criterion was developed for scenarios where the outcomes and the edges are known. Blackjack card counting is a great example. There's a lot of variance in blackjack card counting, but the math is the math. Once you know the rules of the game, you know exactly, based on the account, what your edge is at any given point. There's still variance. You're still going to win or lose in a given session or whatever, and you can have extended winning and losing streaks. You can have extended winning and losing streaks in blackjack play as well. But the big difference between sharp blackjack play, advantage blackjack players, and sports bettors is that the blackjack players have the math clear. It's known. It's precise. Sports betting edges are the opposite of that. And when we don't know exactly, and at A-Train Station, we are very aware of this, and we show you multiple different ways to look at markets, and we'll show you in a minute. But when we look at them multiple different ways, you'll see these EV percentages jumping all over the place, as are the recommended wagers, which are based on the Kelly Criterion. Kelly Criterion is not enough to size sports bets. And it blows my mind that we have a bunch of sports bettors, sharp sports bettors out there, blindly playing Kelly Criterion bets. That is not enough because it is not designed, A, to optimize bet sizing. It is designed to keep you from going broke. It is a risk of ruin calculator, not a bet size optimizer. And B, it doesn't account for imperfect information, which is the one thing we always have in sports betting, which is imperfect information. There are no perfect data in sports betting. Right? All of the edges are calculated on estimates. All of them are presuming that some books know more than others. All of them are looking at line chopping and line movements and things like that. And you're perceiving edges that are estimates at best, right? And sometimes not there at all. And so, and I've made these mistakes. I learned the hard way in using a Kelly-based bet sizing criterion exclusively. And so now I'm here to tell you, okay, here's what you need to do. Because here's how you should bet size. And this is something that I have not heard nearly enough talked about out in the sports betting Twitterverse or whatever it's called today, right? So I want to show you a couple things. So let's go back to A-Train Station and let's look at, we have our bet sizing. This is what I use in my bankroll settings. I'm not going to mess with that. I have a few different plays here that I want to look at, right? In this case, we have a basketball game. This is currently showing at BetMGM at plus 250. It looks like a great play on the surface, right? You've got plus 8.5, and we see 7% edge on our EV calculation. We're like, yeah, look at the market alignment. You have some pretty good market. This looks like a pretty good classic outlier play at BetMGM. Sure. But here's a couple things. Here's a couple things to keep in mind. While we're calculating this using our default weightings, what we see is that there's not really any heavily weighted books. It's largely a market average. Caesars will give a little bit more credit to, but in this case, I don't know that they have any more insight than anybody else. But I see a fairly confused market. There's some alignment, certainly, and BetMGM is certainly off of that. So what would I say here is I'm like, well, here's what we know about this play. Right? We don't have sharp book knowledge, so that's a little bit of a yellow flag. That's not a red flag, but it's a yellow flag. What we see is not a ton of line movement in any of the markets, so that's okay. That's a pretty, that shows some stability in the market, a little bit of line movement here at Fliff and whatnot, but it doesn't really concern me. What you see too is you have a odds scenario here where this is a heavy underdog. Now, in a heavy underdog situation, we would have a couple things to consider. One is that we only have a 30% likelihood of winning this bet, according to our Novig line. This is where those percentages come from. The Novig line is calculated based on a kind of weighted average of all of these different books. Some of them are duplicates so they get ignored. And we say, okay, based on the market assessment, we have 225.7 is the Novig line, plus 250 is the line we can get at MGM. That's almost 25 points of value over the Novig line. That's great. But on a bet that's only 30% likelihood to win, our Kelly bet sizing is actually fairly low here for my typical bet sizing. Now, what I would say is like, well, we don't have a lot of faith in this number. Like, we're really pulling this out of pretty thin air. So based on that, I'm probably going to look at this saying, okay, this is a little bit of a lottery ticket play. It's not very likely to win. We got some edge. I might want to play it, but it's a really pretty big dog for what our normal search criteria is. I might bet it for $40. And I might do that because I'm like, I see a couple yellow flags. I don't have a ton of confidence in the market knowing what it's going here. I think BetMGM is probably off enough to justify a play, but I certainly don't want to treat this calculation as truth. This gets me part of the way, but it's also saying this is a 7% bet. I'm like, I don't know about that. I might bet it for $40-$50. I'll cut it in half. And so I'll say, okay, I see your Kelly, and I'm going to reduce it further because my confidence is lower and Kelly doesn't factor in confidence at all. So I can see Kelly as an initial calibration. And I'm like, I'm going to pull back from that. So again, typically Kelly will be the maximum. So in these settings that you set for Kelly, and whether you're using A-Trade Station or something else, if you're using a Kelly multiplier, in this case, I'm using an extremely conservative 15% Kelly multiplier, which is going to keep my bet sizes fairly low based on a percentage of my bankroll. I'm okay with that because I'm comfortable betting in this range. But even that, I consider the Kelly recommendation as pretty much my highest amount I would be willing to bet. And when I do that, and I say I have some concerns in this market, I'm going to reduce that play. And in this case, I'm probably going to bet $40 or $50 at BetMGM if they take that bet. All right, let's look at another one. Here we have the Delaware State Hornets and Howard Bison. All right, so we're calculating a 2.76% edge on, again, a market-based assessment. You see, this is a pretty deep market. There's a lot of books here. There's a lot of books in this market. And you can see FanDuel just visually pretty well off most of those plays in the market. So I can see, oh, well, we have a Pinnacle here. Let's just look and see on our one chart book here with Pinnacle, what does that give us in terms of a read now? Well, now it goes up to 2.9%, almost 3% on a Pinnacle play here. FanDuel plus 176, still a pretty big underdog play. But we have a very deep market with some pretty good edge in a outlier line at FanDuel. I like this play a lot, knowing that it's still only a 37% likelihood of winning on this particular play. But when I see it for $55, I'm like, wow, there's a lot going on in this market. I think Pinnacle, the sharpest book in the world, is pretty representative of that market. They have a very nice low hold on this. I think this is one where I'm probably betting $55, which is the Kelly recommendation here. It's not too crazy of an EV. And that's the thing too, is when you see a really high EV percentage, you're gonna know Kelly's going to give you a higher recommendation. It's also, those are the scenarios. There's I think it was Spanky that I heard first say it. It's like when you have those Kelly based recommendations and those super high EV percentages that look so good, that is when you are most likely to make your biggest monetary mistakes, because the Kelly criteria, if this were an 8% edge or 7% edge like the last one, this could be a $150, $200 recommendation. And all of a sudden you're betting $200 in a market that maybe the edge read was wrong or goes away from you or whatever. You're over betting that relative to the other bets that you're making. It starts to hockey stick towards those extremes. My recommendation for that is to just have a high bet amount in mind. Say, you know what? No matter what the read, no matter what the odds, I'm not going to bet more than $100 bet, or I'm not going to bet more than $150 bet. Whatever your number is, $5 bet, it doesn't matter what it is. But just say, okay, no matter what it is, I'm not going to risk more than this on a particular bet because I know that we're dealing with imperfect information. So in this case, though, I love the read. I love the depth of market. I love that FanDuel is a clear outlier to all of it. I love that it corresponds with Pinnacle. Everything is green. I see no red flags here at all. And I'm going to make this play at FanDuel for $55. I'm going to play full Kelly recommendation, knowing my Kelly criteria is still pretty conservative for me. I'm going to play it that even knowing that it's a 37% likelihood of winning. All right, finally, let's look at this one. Here's a player prop, shots on goal for a hockey game. All right, again, starting with the market average, you can see clear outlier line, just straight up clear outlier, plus 137 at Bet Rivers, just looks like a glorious play. However, it's a 1.72% edge, which doesn't give us, and this edge, this EV, gives us a, when it's low, there's less margin of error there before it gets to zero or negative, where we're betting into a market that we're going to lose long term in. So we want this number to be healthily positive. We're looking at this, we're like, well, we love the visual. We're like, this is clearly a market outlier. There's just not quite enough green here for us to really bet into this. So down here we have a 1.72%, and we're saying, okay, well, we like Bet Online better for our player props. So why don't we run this one by itself? So we go to Bet Online, and when we run Bet Online by itself, we can see that it has a 2% edge if we use Bet Online alone. So we're like, now we're feeling okay. We really like the visual here. We really like that Bet Online is pretty sharp with player props. And I also look at, I also like Pinnacle. Pinnacle's right in line with Bet Online here. And so on a play where at first I was like, I don't know if there's enough EV for me on this one. Now I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, we got 2%. It's a little bit of an underdog, but it's a 43% chance of winning. So that's fairly good. And we have really good alignment between our two sharpest books on Bet Online and Pinnacle. This is another one. I'm probably playing this one at Bet Rivers for $50. I'm probably going to play. I'm like, yep, you know what? I'm seeing enough here. No real red flags, but here's an edge. Now, all three of these plays that we've looked at all have some commonalities. That's why I chose them. But they're also a little bit different. And what I want you to be thinking about is like, what is that data story? When you're looking at the details of a particular betting market, you're saying, okay, what is this telling us? What are the sharp books telling us? What are the non-sharp books telling us? What is the overall market looking like? What is this particular play? What are the line movements? What is our likelihood of winning? How many other people are in that range? Are this a bifurcated market where you see two different perspectives on a particular play? You can see all these patterns and you start to understand, okay, what is the data fully telling us? Whether or not this is a viable, profitable play or not. And that's the kind of depth you really want to be doing. And at A-Train Station, we make it so that it's very easy to see visually. So you can bring in all that information very quickly, make that determination, and then decide, okay, here's how much I want to bet. I'm going to go bet it. And then you go and do it again because you've got to move quick because these markets are moving fast, right? And so you can do that analysis in the moment and ultimately result. But what I would say is don't just blindly bet Kelly recommendations. There's too much variance. There's too much flex in those calculations, too many estimates, too much data moving around. Always kind of round down, right? You go up to Kelly, not above Kelly. And you're always looking at, is there things in this data story that are just giving me a little concern? And when they do, pull back a little bit, pull back. You'll never regret under betting your bankroll. And yet you still want to get into some of these plays that you are less confident in because there's good value to be made. But when you see a 10% edge or something really big, then you say, well, is there enough data store here? There's some real red flags. I can bet into situations where I see red flags. I just want to have enough EV to justify that uncertainty, right? Risk return. So that's where you say, okay, well, in this situation feels risky, but I've got to calculate a return of 7%. That's feeling pretty good. Let's go and make this play, but let's reduce the bet size. Instead of $100, let's make it $50 or whatever your bet sizing is. And that's where I think you're going to really find that in sports betting, it feels a lot more like a poker game. And that's something that we talked about previously is how sports betting, the mentality of sports betting about pushing the chips and things like that. That's where this kind of butts up to that. It corresponds with that. But from a pure bet sizing perspective, even in isolation, I wanted to take that notion of this is like a poker game. You start with this and then you think contextually about what's happening around you. Do I have other bets on this game? Do I have bets on this player already? Do I have something that would cause me to be alarmed about a portfolio management strategy where I'm like, I am overweight on these kinds of underdogs. Can I find some plays that are more favorite oriented? Can I find for today's betting or this week's betting a nice mix of the different kinds of investments I want to make as a sharp sports bettor? These are the kinds of things that will elevate your game as you continue to be curious and continue to learn about the dynamics of how all of these betting opportunities work. And that, I think, is really where you want to focus your learning, and you want to work with whatever tools you're working with. We think we make a great tool at A-Train Station, but there's plenty of ways you can find information and find ways to get these edges. That's where, though, don't oversimplify. Don't just say, well, I'm going to blindly do Kelly, or I'm going to blindly flat bet, or I'm going to blindly bet units, if you find the book that takes units, right? So that's where I just want you to be realization that sometimes, too, one other thing is that even though you want to go bet $100 at BetMGM, for example, BetMGM might say, you know what, we don't actually want $100 from you. We'll take $35 from you. And at that point, you're like, okay, that's fine. You make the play, then you move on. All right, so you can say what I'd like to bet, and then what you're able to bet when you go to that book, that's going to be a different scenario. So just keep that in mind. A lot to factor in, but it all comes down to that simple notion of saying, here's the Kelly criteria, here's the maximum based on the math, and then you can reduce it from there. So with that, everyone, thank you for watching this. Hopefully you learned something. And for now, this train's leaving the station. Until next time, save the units for the bros and do your betting like the pros.